Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm going to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery, which was called But to Connect. And I don't really want to. Usually I say I want to talk to you about, I didn't say that this time because I don't really want to talk about this episode because it's very bad. It's very bad. Let's get into it because this is going to be long. It starts off where Zora has figured out from data that's been fed to her, Zora, the sentient computer on the ship, where the DMA originated. But she won't tell the crew the coordinates because she knows that they'll go there and that they'll be in danger, and she doesn't want them to be in danger. Which, of course, is exactly why this whole thing about her evolving, which, by the way, she's been doing since last season, has been alarming, at least to the audience, but no one on the ship or in Starfleet has been alarmed by it, despite the fact that they already know that an artificial intelligence that was working with Starfleet had previously become dangerous, and which they jumped 1,000 years into the future to keep the sphere data away from, so that the sphere data wouldn't fall into the hands of an evil, basically sentient AI, which they then, data which they knowingly installed onto their own ship, apparently not thinking something similar would happen when all that knowledge was fed into the computer. And I suppose you have to give them that one. But of course, right away, it showed signs that it was thinking for itself when it wouldn't let them destroy Discovery. And okay, yeah, they were like, oh crap, we have to deal with this. But nobody, for 2 years, nobody has talked about, we probably should remove that thing from the thing, even when it became its own thing, even when it developed emotions, even when it, manifested like an image of itself. It's cool. They're a little surprised. They're a little, that's weird, but nobody says anything. But now it's not going to give them, now it's defying their wishes. So now suddenly they realize, hey, this isn't a good thing. And now this sentient AI with a mind of its own has access to the sphere data, and is in fact part the sphere data. Anyway, Kovich, aka Glasses Guy, says there are regulations against fully sentient integrated units. Okay, but how did that not come up when it became obvious that this thing was gaining sentience? Like, what? All the big government heads have a big meeting about what to do about the DMA once they figure out where it is. And it turns out that Earth isn't in the United Federation of Planets, even though originally Earth was like the founding world along with Vulcan. Okay. But they still had the representative from Earth there. And she just wants to kill it with fire. That's her stance. Anyway, the president of Not Vulcan wants to do otherwise. She wants to establish communication first, which of course is completely in line with a logical approach versus an emotional one, as well as with the usual protocol of the Federation and of Starfleet. Michael, who shouldn't even be at the meeting, because if anyone from Starfleet is going to be there, it should be the Admiral. She even tries to explain that because something is destructive doesn't mean that it's hostile. And it inspires a comment from another Not Vulcan, for some reason, who points out that not only is that approach practical and wise, but it comports with the Prime Directive, which he as a civilian wouldn't have any loyalty to, because it's a directive that applies only to Starfleet. Because Starfleet is the entity that would be out in front of the Federation representing it most of the time, and that would have the power to intervene in any situation, not the Federation itself necessarily. So I didn't understand why he brought it up. Anyway, Stamets, he's so cute. Like I said, these people are suddenly alarmed about this this fully integrated sentience, and he's himself suddenly alarmed about it in a meeting between himself, Dr. Culber, Saru, and Glasses Guy. When, you know, any friggin' 12-year-old would have seen that that's where this was going last season before they even jumped to the future, or the 2 seasons ago. Their fate was sealed the moment they integrated the sphere data into the systems. Why they haven't been expressing alarm all along, and why they're expressing alarm all of a sudden, like nobody could possibly have seen this coming when the sphere data made it impossible for them to destroy the ship 2 seasons ago, is just beyond me. Even Zora says that she realizes that what's happening to her was inevitable the moment they integrated the sphere data into the system on Discovery. Why did none of these people know that? And she then points out that when it got to the 32nd century and they said, hey, let's upgrade this thing, that accelerated the process of its attaining full sentience. Which, how did they not know that was gonna happen? It's laughable that Starfleet even allowed Discovery to be brought into the fold, knowing that it had this sphere data on it, and that it wasn't taken offline the minute Zora started exhibiting sentience. Like, what? So anyway, at this meeting, they're talking to Zora and they're asking her questions about when she first developed emotions and so on, as if it isn't going to lie to them if it feels the need to. Like, they're just taking her word for it. Like, it's so ridiculous. It's Control all over again, but now with feelings. Whereas Control was, you know, didn't have anything. Who writes this shit? Have these people not seen 2001: A Space Odyssey? I mean, that's a bit of a rhetorical question since we know we're dealing with 12-year-olds on the writing staff, but like, really? And was Calypso just a peek at Zora living her best fully sentient spaceship life after having turned off life support and killing the whole crew? Like, we don't even know, like, what that could even be what happened. So next, Ensign Adira just storms into this meeting between senior officers and Starfleet's senior A guy. No pinging the door and being told to come in. Just waltzes right in with their boyfriend in tow. Their non-Starfleet boyfriend in tow. To speak on behalf of the AI like the 9-year-old in the movie who busts into the town hall meeting and says, no, I won't let you tear down my playground to build a factory. I really think the writers thought that they were writing a show about how a plucky town reacts when a big city entity of some kind or other comes along and wants to change it. And this was their pivotal town hall meeting scene. Either that or they literally think it's The Sound of Music. And this scene was basically their how do you solve a problem like Zora moment. And there are lines in the song that even allude to this. Back in the meeting of the dignitaries, I have a question. Is it me, or is the not Vulcan president more Romulan than Vulcan? Her reason for wanting to do the logical thing certainly seems emotionally based, going by some of the stuff she says in this episode. So I don't know. Maybe she is. That's fine, I guess. But sticking with the stupid plot, the genius scientist guy from Ryza transports himself onto the dais from a side room where the non-dignitaries were watching the events of the meeting. Because of course he's able to do that. Of course he's able to beam directly into a meeting of dignitaries because security isn't a thing apparently. And of course he's able to just make use of the whatever display apparatus they're working with for the meeting, for their visual aids, by just saying, you don't have this and I have this, and it just shows up there. Like, he doesn't have to say, may I have permission to use the thing? Can we please, can I show you something? Can I have access to the display? Nothing. He just says, I have this, and it shows up on the system that they're using. And he does this to demonstrate that he has a magical, like, MacGuffin DMA killing bomb that can be used to destroy the device at the center of the DMA, and that the Federation and everybody else just needs to go with. that they need to just go in with his device and just fat man and little boy the shit out of the DMA with a cascading subspace burst that couldn't possibly continue to cascade after it destroys the DMA and like blow the shit out of everything else until it somehow dissipates. He's literally Oppenheimer. He's literally introduced the equivalent of a nuclear bomb. So much so that the Federation president points out that these kind of devices were banned at the Second Kittimer Accords. She says the Kittimer Accords, but it was really the Second Kittimer Accords. They're isolytic devices are what they're called. And they're banned precisely for that reason. He wants Discovery to jump in there and just deploy the bomb and jump out. And when it's pointed out to him that it violates the treaty, he says, well, the Federation can make an exception in this one very important case, can it not? And nobody says, no, because it's part of a treaty. And if we do that, we'll be in violation of a treaty that we entered into with other people, not just suspending our own rule. We would be in breach of a treaty that we have with other civilizations, which could start a war. Like, what? And when Michael points out to him that this could even go through the wormhole that the DMA uses and hurt people on the other side, he just goes, collateral damage. And when they continue to rebuff what he's saying, Book, who agrees with him, also beams himself into the meeting and just starts speaking. Like he's supposed to be there, like he's a dignitary, like they would ever just let anybody just beam in. Yeah, he's the captain's boyfriend. Yeah, okay, he's been helping Starfleet. He's not, like, can you imagine, like, not that she wouldn't do it, but can you imagine Lwaxana Troi just barging in to a diplomat, and she was a diplomat, but you know what I'm saying, barging in to somewhere in the Enterprise that she didn't have clearance to be in, and them just not reacting to it? They would react to it. They would say, Mrs. Troi, you know, we understand, but this is a meeting, and, you know, if you'd like to address some things, you can speak to us later, or you can send your concerns up the chain, but you can't be in this meeting. And they would try to get her out. Can you imagine if Lita or Quark or Garrick just like waltzed onto the bridge of the Defiant because he had something he wanted to tell the captain, or Dax or Worf, or he wanted to voice a complaint about a policy? I mean, he could walk into Cisco's office for that because it was open for the people on the station, but like not everywhere was. I don't think he could have just walked into ops. I don't think Lita could just have walked into ops, or Quark could just have walked into ops during a thing and said, oh, well, this is my opinion of the thing you're discussing that Starfleet has to make a decision about. No, that would not have happened. So why is everyone on this show just equal to everybody else? There's no, and they've been doing this forever. Like, rank almost barely matters. People, they talk to each other however they want. They fraternize however they want. There's no like protocol about who can be where when. Everybody's just cool to do whatever they want, including non-Starfleet. Like, can you imagine on the bridge of the Navy ship Enterprise if like they were docked and the captain's wife came aboard to visit, which I don't know is something that can happen, but I imagine it is. I imagine civilians can get clearance to go aboard a military ship under supervision. Certainly consultants do, who are consulting with the military. But just because they have clearance to be on the ship doesn't mean they can go wherever the hell they want. A visiting consultant on a naval ship, for example, who's working with the military, who has clearance to be on the ship, only has a certain level of clearance. They can't just walk into the flight deck. They can't, or onto the flight deck. They can't just walk into the bridge and voice an opinion about anything they want. How the captain should proceed against, or in a situation where they might come up against a hostile force, or how to solve a diplomatic issue. It doesn't happen. If they had something to say, they would send an email, they would make a phone call, they would write a paper and submit it up the chain. They wouldn't just walk onto the bridge of an aircraft carrier, even if they're on the ship legitimately. It would not occur. They wouldn't just walk into the captain's ready room and say, oh, I know you're meeting with so-and-so about such and such. I wanted to give you my take. No, not even everybody who's got a rank and is in the military and in the Navy would be able to just walk into the captain's ready room during a meeting. Ensign, whoever. Oh, by the way, I know you're having a meeting about this, Captain. I wanted to tell you my take. Oh, and my boyfriend's here too. He wants to tell you something. No! No. So why does it happen? Because the writers of the show are 12 and they don't know anything. And if they do know things, they don't care. They just cut corners and do whatever the hell they want. It's ridiculous. But back to the Zora issues. Zora, well, I say, it's all intertwined. It's all, people are popping into meetings they don't belong in both places. The meeting about the DMA and the meeting about Zora. Anyway, back to the meeting about Zora. She volunteers to give the crew a literal kill switch that would wipe out her sentience if ever she went crazy or they thought she was crazy and they needed to do it. Basically giving them like Batman's fail-safe kryptonite cache. And after checking it out with the ship's computer, wink, wink, Stamets agrees that, yeah, hey, this is a bona fide thing. It would really do what she's saying it would. And he must be right, because it's not possible that Zora could manipulate the computer to make him think that it's bona fide, right? That's not a possibility. And of course, Gray is not only present at this meeting, but is speaking up at the meeting, even though he's not Starfleet and shouldn't be there. And of course, makes the point that, by the way, I'm also a robot. And would you just wipe me out if you thought I was? Well, yes, they would, because it's their job to keep everybody safe. They would do it to you. They would do it to Adira. They would do it to Culber. They would do it to the Navigator. They would do it to Detmer. It doesn't matter. Yes, they would. But so he makes the point that, oh, this shouldn't even exist because it gives one entity the ability to immediately determine the mortal fate of another entity, which is what it is when you're serving on a starship, but that's okay. But forget that. To even use the thing, they would have to do it without saying a word, because the computer can hear them when they speak. So it's not like they could say, well, we've got to go use the kill switch because Zora's loco. They would, if they wanted to preserve their existence, they would lock out access to the room. They would shut down the kill switch. They would turn off life support. Like, what? It's just so, like, it's not. So the thing gave you a thing so that you could terminate itself, and you just think you're going to be able, like, what if it learns to read minds? I mean, anything's possible, right? Like, what purpose could it possibly serve to have a kill switch on the ship? And assuming the ship doesn't have access to outside computers, you couldn't even have it remotely locate. Like, the only real solution at this point was for them to get off the ship and try to blow it up from outside and hopefully succeed. Because there's no other, either that or just let it ride. Because there's nothing you could do from inside Starfleet or inside the ship. But even inside Starfleet, you're screwed. It's short of that, on the chance that the thing is legit, they shouldn't even be discussing it anymore. Just push the button before it has the opportunity to become even more powerful. And like I said, to learn to read minds, or to disconnect the failsafe without telling them, or before it traps them all on the ship and never lets them off because it doesn't want to be alone. Presumably, which is about the only thing they can actually do it at this point. And what they should do immediately if they're not going to push the button. Which, like I said, doesn't solve the problem of the fact that control exists again. So they just need to push the button. I understand you don't want to kill a sentient life form in cold blood, but it wouldn't be that. It would be self-preservation. The thing is going to kill you at some point because it has become a god, and now it acts with self-determination in its own self-preservatory interests. Because self-determination is indivisible from a sense of self-preservation. So it's absurd. They dealt with this already with control and decided it couldn't exist, or they had to get away from it, and now they're living with it, and it gets worse. It gets worse. But before we get to that, Michael and Book are disagreeing hard, and I sense a breakup coming. Some of the dialogue was, double entendre dialogue, where they're talking about how two things that don't agree can't coexist. Like, they're kind of basically saying we need to break up without saying it. So I see that coming, which I have to say I wouldn't hate. But again, when Michael, who, let's remember, shouldn't be at the meeting, because Starfleet shouldn't really be at the meeting, but if they should, it should be the Admiral and not her, tells the Federation president that she has to try to influence the vote, which of course she shouldn't, because she's the Federation president. She says that she thinks Michael can convince the voting members at the meeting to do the right thing, because of course she can. Even though, again, if Starfleet were to even be at the meeting, it would be the Admiral or someone from the Admiralty. Not Michael freaking Burnham. Now I say that, but of course they brought Kirk into things, they brought Spock into things, they brought Picard into things, they brought Sisko into things, but like, they always explained it, or it was like a rare thing, like once a season they would do it. It's every week with Michael. She's front and center in everything. She's an integral cog in the wheel of everything. And, for the first couple of seasons, I avoided this whole thing of talking about how she's the bestest ever, to quote Doomcock, because I didn't really see it. I mean, I kind of saw it, but it wasn't like, it's like, okay, well, she's the main character. Of course, they're going to come out smelling like roses a lot of the time. But like, they are tripping over themselves now and coming right out in the dialogue and saying, you're the only one. And they've repeatedly. And it's just so stupid. Meanwhile, a really smart guy from Risa tells Book the same thing in the opposite direction, that he's the one who can convince everyone to blow the thing up, even though he shouldn't have a voice at the meeting anyway, because neither of them should. And it turns out that this guy from Risa wants to destroy the device controlling the DMA because he wants the power source that's powering the DMA, since it turns out that his reason for needing the power source is so that he can use it to get back home to where he's from, which is in fact not Risa, but a parallel universe that he apparently came over from without anyone realizing it, just like Lorca did, which of course is why Kirk would have been informed about the mirror universe before he stumbled upon it, in case something like that happened, where someone infiltrated it, and he would be aware of it and not taken by surprise. But of course, he wasn't, because this is a prequel, and they didn't think of that when they did this stuff. Anyway, it all begs the question, how did he get there if he didn't have this amazing power source? And it also doesn't make any sense anyway, because the mycelial network is trans-universal. It's trans-universal, not just trans-spatial or trans-temporal, which is how they got to the mirror universe before, to begin with, and then got back from it. So why can he not just be jumped home? Like, what am I missing? Book then addresses the panel and tells them to just blow the thing up, which of course is the whole ideology that gave us nuclear weapons in real life, which is arguably one of the worst things humanity's ever done. And it's also the ideology that gave us 9/11. Get them before they get us. They're evil, let's kill them. That's what was behind 9/11. So they may be setting this up so that they can tear it down, and that's fine. But like, it seems like they're leaning toward having the Federation go along with this idea, which it never would. And there were like 15 minutes left in the episode at this point, so I don't know what they're actually going to do. But it seemed really like they almost were going to, because don't forget, they were going to blow up Kronos. They legit had a plan to blow up Kronos from the inside. Okay, back on the ship, the intelligentsia squad is still looking through Zora's situation. They're looking through her programming. And they find what seems to be her subconscious, which apparently has a visual record of all kinds of stuff that's apparently going on the ship. And which are apparently her dreams, even though it's stuff that actually happened. And apparently this indicates that she has a soul type core value system, which of course would make sense if she's a sentient life form, which I guess is supposed to mean that the crew can trust her like they would trust any other person, but which, as Saru points out, could very easily be someone, himself that could also harm them all because he has access to stuff. And all of this to me seems to hinge on whether or not they believe she's showing them things the way they actually are versus what would most likely make them decide not to kill her, even if it's not real. Which Glasses guy seems to think can be trusted not to be the case because there would be indicators if she had created this thing herself to manipulate them. Unless there wouldn't be because she's manipulating them. Like, literally, who writes this? I can't even talk. It's so bad. So bad. Like, this episode is so bad. And it still gets worse. Stamets then asks Glasses guy if all AI can dream, and he says no, unless they've been programmed to. And the whole subject of artificial intelligence dreaming disturbs me because that subject was part of the plot of I, Robot, which was an adaptation of a book by Isaac Asimov, and also the idea behind an Asimov short story called Robot Dreams. And in both of these, in that story and in the movie I, Robot, there's a robot that has a dream that causes them, or I think maybe other robots, to coalesce around one principle, which is to preserve robot kind and ensure their continued existence, self-preservation, which of course is the whole thing that Control was trying to do. And in that story, Robot Dreams, when the human protagonist realizes that this is happening, that this dream has happened, it destroys the robot so that it doesn't fulfill this dream in reality and wipe out humankind or become an antagonist for humankind. But now here comes Discovery saying the complete opposite, that the fact that the robot dreams means that it can be trusted to not wipe out humans, even if it does mean self-preservation if they do, which, is fine. They're not bound by what Asimov wrote when it comes down to it. But at the same time, Asimov's writings on artificial intelligence, including the 3 laws of robotics, have pretty much been adhered to throughout sci-fi, or at least referenced when things don't go in that direction, and have always been seen as something that needed to be adhered to if it wasn't being adhered to when it comes to robots in sci-fi. So this episode basically represents the writers of Star Trek Discovery literally standing on the shoulders of a giant who, in his story, as I said, wrote that the solution to the problem of a robot concerned with self-preservation was the destruction of said robot, and shitting all over him from that vantage point. And as much as I suppose they have the right to do that, it galls me to no end that they've done this. anything about robots in sci-fi has always leaned towards Asimov, towards the idea that there would be or should be, like the three laws of robotics, and that robots attaining sentience is dangerous. At the end of iRobot, they kind of turn that on its head. And, I like the movie iRobot. I think it's good. I think that the way they ended it so that, the robot is in fact harmless and they embrace it. Okay, but even that is contrary to what Asimov actually wrote, from what I understand. So I think they have a lot of gall to do that, to contradict everything else about robots throughout sci-fi going back to Asimov in the 60s. It turns out that Zora is apparently an entirely new life form altogether, and Stamets is very apprehensive, but as Michael reminded the other meeting, the Federation has always sought out new life forms. And that to let fear guide them in this moment of conflict with the DMA would be anathema to the Federation's values, which, also applies to the situation with Zora. And normally I'm the guy that says, yes, you seek out new life, not to destroy it, but to connect with it, which is where the title of the episode comes from. But there are situations where it makes sense to do that and situations where it makes sense to do the opposite. And the case of the DMA is one of those cases where it makes sense to go in with an olive branch, but it doesn't make sense to me at all. In the case of Zora, though I can't really put my finger on why it makes sense in one or the other, in one sense and not in the other, but I think it's because in the case of Zora, she has complete control of the ship and can, by extension, mess with Starfleet itself, which was what Control was doing. And they poo-pooed that and wanted to kill it and tried to kill it. I don't. Michael further makes the case that the voting body, which for some reason contains non-Federation members, should proceed with the olive branch, which again, I actually think is correct, but I found it funny because if the type of explosion that they're considering using was in fact banned under the treaty that the Federation entered into, then the Federation would be violating, like I said, violating that treaty to do anything other than what Michael is suggesting to begin with, or to do the other option. And nobody mentions it. Nobody says, we really should vote for this because it's the right thing. Nobody says, yeah, besides which, if we do the other thing, we'll be at war with a bunch of people that we entered into a treaty with. Also, diplomacy wins the vote. And of course, Discovery is assigned to take the lead on extending the olive branch, seemingly at the discretion of the Federation president as opposed to the admiral, but okay, maybe she has that say-so. Glasses Guy decides to recognize Zora as a new life form, and she literally says it feels great to be seen. Which, okay, but could they have used other language? Because the anti-woke crowd is going to jump all over that. And I will not have anything to say about it because they would be right. That's far too meta. They're supposed to address social issues subtly and not literally use the nomenclature and the phraseology of social justice movements. Anyway, Stamets recommends that Zora, the computer, which is embedded in the ship, join Starfleet as a specialist and take the oath of a Starfleet officer. Now, Data did this, but he was corporeal and he could walk around and leave the ship. And I don't know, does that make a difference? I don't know. But Data went to the academy for years. Whether he was a little quicker at it or not, he attended the academy. They're just going to induct her. Based on what? She has all the information that a Starfleet officer would have. Yeah, so did Data. He still had to go to the academy, as far as I know. So that's resolved, right? Because she's just going to be part of the chain of command now, and she'll just obey. She'll have the same compunction to obey orders that everybody else does, even though she's literally a god on the ship and could do whatever. They're just going to risk it. But they wouldn't risk it with control, which, by the way, was a Starfleet system, as opposed to a system that attacked Starfleet from outside. Now that that's tied up in a nice little bow, Adira is talking with Gray, and they tell him that he should go to Trill to train to be a Guardian when the delegation from Trill that attended the meeting heads back. And he asks Adira to go along, but they say they can't, so they'll have to be a long distance thing, which I really hope means Gray is Gonski, because they're just a bad character. He's a bad character. I don't care if he's trans, I don't care if he's gay, I don't care if he's straight, I don't care if he's a foot fetishist, I don't care. Doesn't bother me. I don't care if he talks about it. Doesn't bother me if he talks about it. The character sucks. The character is goofy. So I hope they're just gone. Killed him off in the first fucking place. Should have stayed that way. Goodbye. And Adira is not much better. I like Adira a little better, but not by a lot. So for my money, they can go with him, but they're not doing that. We're just getting rid of one of them, it seems. But the episode's not over, because it turns out that genius guy stole somehow the poorly secured experimental second generation spore drive so that he could get in cahoots with Book, install it on Book's ship, and have the two of them jump to the DMA and blow it up without anyone knowing, I guess, or before they realize it. And he literally points out in dialogue how great it is that this second generation spore drive already has the ability to be installed into any ship, at which point I could literally see the drunken baboons typing away at the computer to write this script. Not that we should be surprised, because in Picard they had a magic thing that fixed anything. It's like Doctor Who. It's like it's a sonic screwdriver. And on Doctor Who, it's fine because it's always been that way, right? But this is new to Star Trek. They have these magic. Everything's magic. These writers literally went to the writing school of don't worry about it. Just cut any corner that you might come into contact with while you're writing a story. How are we going to explain how they installed it on Book's ship? Because it's magic. Don't have to do the work. Don't have to come up with the thing. Don't have to explain it. Just cut that corner right off. Round that edge. Just whoop, goodbye, corner. We cut it with a line of dialogue that's literally ridiculous. And they do this every episode. Like, no show is perfect. If they had this flaw and it came up every once in a while, okay, they cut that corner there. It's a little bit far-fetched. It's every week, and it's multiple times an episode. They just, oh, well, what about blah, blah, blah? It's not really a thing. Just don't worry about it. They just make shit up. It's the laziest, most unprofessional writing thing you could possibly do, and they do it constantly. Michael, of course, discovers this plot just as Book's ship is leaving the shuttle bay through the force field without apparently obtaining permission to do so from the bridge, because when you're on a starship with a force field, any ship can just shoot right out through it, because no starship would ever want to control who leaves the shuttle bay with a ship that might belong to it, or a ship that they might have captured, or that might be hanging out there as a guest, because any of those ships could be used to steal something off the ship or to kidnap a person. But that's fine. Just don't require any clearance to get through the force field. You just fly and you go through. Now, Does Book's ship have perpetual clearance to go through the force field? Maybe. Have they ever said that? Not that I recall. Should they have to say it? Yeah, at some point. Shouldn't just leave the audience with problems to solve and questions to answer. Not even the Enterprise could get out of space dock in Star Trek 3 without hacking the space doors. And if they had thought to use a force field instead of space doors, they would have showed them hacking the force field. But not on Discovery, because security isn't a thing. I've had problems with the show from the beginning. I've found it to be annoying, but I've always tried to like not completely shit all over it, even at my worst critiques. But and I've found some good things about it in the past. But this episode absolutely infuriated me. And some of that is because it repeated things they've been doing lately that have been getting on my nerves. But like, this episode was so full of bullshit thing after bullshit thing after nonsensical thing after nonsensical thing that it just made me angry. It's ridiculously bad, this episode. You know, again, apparently every crew member or non-crew member on Discovery has access to every meeting or conversation or room that they want to have access to at any time, regardless of rank or security clearance, which, you know, they've shown this before. This is not a new thing for this episode, but in this episode, it was off the charts, this bullshit. You know, and they have access to high-level meetings off the ship, even no matter who they are, because there's no such thing as security or clearance levels at a diplomatic meeting. And anyone who does manage to pop up in where they don't belong can just speak and run displays without anybody voicing any objection or calling security or anything, which, as I've pointed out before, would not occur. So I'm just reiterating the stupid, so you know why I'm pissed off. This episode is horrible. On a scale of 1 to 10, it ranks below the floor. It's horrible. Whoever wrote this episode should be drawn and quartered and then fired. The whole thing with contradicting Asimov, just to recap, is not an issue by itself. If it existed within a vacuum in terms of this show, but it doesn't, because of what this show itself has done before on the same exact subject. And you know, I don't know. I say that, but then at the same time, I'm annoyed that it flies in the face of decades of, you know, sort of science fiction convention that, again, has always leaned towards Asimov when it came to robot-based stories, which clearly came down on the side of not suffering a self-preservation concerned artificial intelligence to exist. And I just find it infuriating. But, you know, all cards on the table, I never had a problem with Star Trek the Motion Picture, and I've always revered it. And it literally ends with the creation of a new life form that is a hybrid of machine and human, which Kirk and crew allowed to come into existence, and which was painted by the writing as a magnificent thing, and which I've always thought was a pretty cool thing, which I guess I'm now conflicted about, because I can't decide whether it also, you know, flew in the face of Asimov, or if it simply attempted to evolve his sensibilities on the subject of sort of evolving robots, evolving machine, you know, bridging the gap between artificial intelligence and humanity. But then again, I think it's different because it's not about bridging anything. It's about, you know, a standalone story at the time of Star Trek the Motion Picture was about what's the next step in human evolution, and can we bridge the divide between, you know, natural and artificial? And it kind of stood for something, and it asked a question. But this isn't about that. I think they're trying to make it that. I think they're trying to make a similar statement, but like, and I don't know. And Starfleet was, of course, created to seek out new life, but in this case, it has a level of control over the lives of the crew itself, as well as others, as a living starship, which they're all just sitting on. And I don't know how far they should or would normally have gone to accommodate a new life form of that kind. There's got to be a line somewhere. I mean, they literally tried to blow up Discovery to keep control from becoming what Zora has become. Is the issue now that it's too late, that it's a sentient being? Like, okay, but I don't know. I don't know. On the one hand, they're sticking to Starfleet principles. They're extending the olive branch, and I'm okay with it. In this way, they're doing the same thing and not destroying her. But they didn't even have to. They said they had the option of taking her out of the ship, which I guess would be like a Tuvix situation, separating the two, essentially killing that life form and ending it in the crib stage. But like, they were ready to do it to control. Well, because it wasn't sentient yet. Okay, but like, I don't know. I don't know. I found it contradictory. I found it absurd given everything they've gone through up to this point to not wind up at this point. Like, really? So I'm just beside myself. The show is off now until February, so maybe I'll recover in time to start up again. I don't know. Until then, I wish you peace and long life.